Usually I write about biblical history and ancient civilizations, but this time my editor and I decided to write about 10 people that did incredible things. And the operative question, you know, my students always work with a research question, so in this case the research question of the book was, what did these 10 people have in common? What basically makes ordinary people do extraordinary things? Now, we've all been, you know, to the Cineplex recently, I'm sure, and you see these Marvel comic motion pictures, you know, these supernatural supermen and superwomen do incredible things. And in the movie, they all have very special powers. But that's fantasy. What I think is far more interesting is to follow 10 people who did truly extraordinary things just based on their own conviction, based on their own commitment. And the question was, what do these people have in common? So I picked 10 folks, and the two people I'd like to briefly talk about today are Gandhi and Mother Teresa, two people from very, very different perspectives. On the one hand, you have a person coming in from a Hindu culture. On the other hand, you have a person coming in from a Christian culture. Now, both, and few people have made that link between the two actually, both lived in the British Raj, the British Empire, the last days of the British Empire. And it's important to remember that at the time, India was far, far bigger than it is today. India comprised India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, a beautiful country. I just visited it 5 weeks ago. Some 225 million people all together in this empire. And of course, the colonial people, the British officials and soldiers, they lived very, very well with servants. But the average Indian person lived, of course, in a far more primitive condition. And this is when we hear of a person called Mohandas Gandhi. Now, you've heard him referred to as Mahatma, which means great soul. But Mahatma was a honorific that they gave him in 1915, after he had come back from South Africa and began his great work with the Indian people. And Gandhi was a middle-class person. He was educated in Britain to become a barrister, which is a fancy word for an attorney, and spent some time in South Africa, where he was really struck by the inequality there, and came back in 1915, and eventually rose to become the head of the National Congress, which was the resistance movement, a movement in India that tried to have the British quit India, and at the same time build a foundation for a new India by fostering religious tolerance, particularly between Hindus and Muslims, by fostering women's rights, and above all, Swaraj, which is self-rule for India. Now, it's very funny, but one of the things that the British were doing, and I don't want to knock on the British because they did many good things in India. They built a railway system, which is still functioning today, somewhat. They built an infrastructure, they built schools, they built hospitals. When you compare colonial rule under Britain to colonial rule under the French, or God forbid, under the Dutch, there's no question that the British tried to do a lot more for the people. But still, people want to self-govern themselves. And one of the things that the British did was they would take the cotton that was grown in India, ship it to Manchester, create clothing out of that, and then bring the clothing back to India to sell it back to the Indian people. And Gandhi said, this is ludicrous. This is our cotton. So what he encouraged people to do, and I'm sure you've seen this picture, is to spin their own khadi, their own garments, using Indian cloth, instead of buying British-made textiles. And of course, this is the famous picture of him with one of those spinning wheels, which he designed himself. And he encouraged everyone to do that. Every waking moment, you would see him there. When he's interviewed by the media, he sits there spinning his own khadi. In 1946, something really terrible happened. The British realized that they had to get out of India quick. The British Empire was basically bankrupt because of World War II. And because of the tensions between Muslims and Hindus, as well as many other constituencies, they decided to partition India. And Gandhi was against it, fervently against it. But at this point, Gandhi no longer had the influence on his people that he had before, because he had been imprisoned in World War II for a very long time. Now, if you look at this map, you will see that there was no clear, clean partition between Muslims on the one hand and Hindus on the other. They were all over the place, basically. So when the partition came about in 1946, you see a tremendous upheaval of millions, literally millions of Muslims trying to get north towards what would become Pakistan, and millions of Hindus going the other way. And throughout the country, either Hindu or Muslim property is burned. Many massacres take place. In Calcutta, in 1 week alone, 5,000 people were killed and 100,000 made homeless. And the civil war was a tremendous source of pain for Gandhi. He went to Delhi, to the house of a rich person called Birla, and that's where he began nightly prayer meetings. Nightly prayer meetings, and these were broadcast on All India Radio. He wanted to end the violence in India literally on a wing and a prayer. Well, a prayer, true, but instead of a wing, it was going to be a fast. So he announced that he was going to have these prayer meetings and fast to the death, unless or until the warring parties in India decided to come together and live in peace. And it's so interesting to me that these prayer meetings, and I describe them in the book, he would not just do something out of the Hindu scripture, such as the Bhagavad Gita, which is an excerpt of the Ramayana. He would do that, but then he would also read from the Quran, a chapter or surah from the Quran, and then he would sing a Christian hymn or read from the Christian Bible. What he was saying is, we are all branches of the same tree. That whatever religious expression we seek, it is simply that which is most comfortable, most familiar to us because of our cultural condition. But we're all ultimately children of God. And then he recited his peace prayer, and I'm sure you've seen this many times. I offer you peace, I offer you love, I offer you friendship. Well, this went on for weeks. And his condition became very, very severe, very severely ill. He was attended by his loyal assistants. This is a picture taken just a few days before it was announced that he was on the verge of death, that he would not last another day. And it was only then, when news spread that he had a few more hours to live, that the Indian Congress finally decided to pass a resolution that guaranteed the safety of Muslim people and property throughout India. That's when the warring parties decided to stop the civil war. The killing stopped. And when Gandhi was shown the document, he decided to give up his fast. That's how, on a wing and a prayer, this man saved India from self-destruction. Of course, 8 days later, he was assassinated. And unfortunately, but because of that final moment, because of that great heroic stand with his fast and his peace prayer, this picture, as you can see, millions of people came to Delhi to accompany him to his final resting place. An incredible, incredible story. And what is so fascinating is, in the same time period of 1946, we have another person coming to India and active in India. She was a nun, and she happened to go on a train ride from Calcutta, where she worked, all the way to Darjeeling, which is in the north, just in the first hills of the Himalayas. Her name was Agnes Rose. Well, I'm not going to try to pronounce it to you in Albanian, Anjezi Ngonji, or something like that. But that was her name, Agnes Rose. Very, very attractive young girl. She was the third child of an Albanian merchant, but very sickly. She was diagnosed with tuberculosis. But even though she was sickly, she had heard about the conditions in India and wanted to become a nun. She was really desperate to become a sister. So she joined the Order of the Sisters of Laredo, which was an organization based in Ireland, but was active all over the world, particularly in India. And when you join an organization like that, a religious organization, you can adopt a name, usually inspired by a saint, at least that's the Catholic tradition. And she was always very much taken with Thérèse de Lisieux, which was a 19th century saint who was very sickly, like herself, and who died at an early age. And she really identified with that person. So she wanted to be called Teresa or Teresa. There was only one problem. There was already another nun in the organization by the name of Teresa. So she decided to adopt the Spanish spelling, Teresa. And that's why she's ultimately called Mother Teresa without an H. Well, this is the place where she went. I mean, it's amazing when you go to India, and my wife and I were there just 5 weeks ago. These places still exist. I haven't heard of many pilgrimage to these places, but it would be fantastic to just go to all these places where Mother Teresa worked. This is the school, the Lerida School, where she not only became a teacher, but something truly strange happened in 1937, because even though she was 27, she was appointed as the Mother Superior of the convent and the headmistress of the school. Unbelievable. She had only a high school diploma, if that, had no higher learning development whatsoever, and yet the order saw such promise in her that they made her the head of the school and the convent. Now, it's important to realize that this was not catering to poor folk. I mean, there's a lot of mystery about that, but the school of Lerida in India catered to the upper crust. These were very well educated, very well-to-do children who came to the convent to be educated. She lived at the convent, but the poverty of Calcutta was still very, very far removed from her. And then came World War II. And Calcutta changed from a beautiful city, the pearl of the East, into an incredible cesspool of medieval proportions. And the reason why is that right after the war, at the outbreak of the Civil War, as we just saw, 4 million refugees came into the city, creating 3,000 new slums. The city was simply not equipped to deal with that influx of refugees. And so what you see that the whole sewage system developed by the British collapsed, and literally a modern 20th century city regressed back into medieval times, with raw sewage running through the streets, with children living in the sewage, living in dirt, pretty much what we can still see to some extent in Calcutta today. And that is what became, of course, the situation that prompted her to act. By late 46, some studies have shown more than 90% of the population suffered from some form of dysentery or malnutrition. 90% of the city. This was hell on earth. The place had become hell on earth. Now, you would think that Mother Superior Teresa, having braved all these challenges, having shepherded, guided the school and the convent through all this upheaval, would have been getting a commendation, a medal, of some form of recognition of her incredible strength and perseverance of having survived this terrible time. But in September, she received a note and was dismissed from her post. She was fired as Mother Superior. She was fired as the head of the school. No reason given. No reason given. And that's one of the, in the scholarship about Mother Teresa, and there is some scholarship, this is one of the great mysteries. Why did they do that? I mean, she was young. She was talented. She obviously had done great work. And yet she was dismissed. And for her, for Mother Teresa, this was an incredible turning point. She became very ill. Tremendous stress. She was back to being Sister Teresa. And her sisters, her fellow sisters, says, you need to go back to Darjeeling, where she had worked when she had just arrived in India many years before. Darjeeling is sort of the Indian Switzerland. It's beautiful, there are tall mountains, it's cool. There are beautiful tea plantations. That's where Darjeeling tea comes from. So she decided to do that and went on this train. And on this train, she heard, she said, a whisper of God. Literally, the story has been told many times, and I tell it in the book as well. And she heard a voice saying, I was to leave the convent, help the poor, while living among them. And that was the key thing. Sisters working in Calcutta in India, they didn't live among them. They lived in nice monasteries and convents. Yeah, they catered to the poor, but at night, they went into a nice soft bed. And she said, no, to do the work we need to live among them. And that's what she did. And a whole sequence of events took place. I will not belabor it. You can find it in the book because, you know, as a nun trying to leave an order is pretty hard. It's pretty difficult. But it went all the way up to the Pope. And the Pope said, if that's the voice she heard, then clearly that's what we need to do. And this is the house. It still exists in Calcutta on the Lower Circular Road where she built her first missionary house. But what I want to leave you with is the incredible story of Nirmal Hriday. This place is called the Place of the Immaculate Heart. And this is the last thing I'm going to share with you, but the problem was in the medieval conditions that Calcutta had descended to, people were dying in the streets, literally dying in the gutter. There's a story that was reported in the newspaper where a 15-year-old boy was dying in the gutter. And some people picked him up and took him to the hospital, and the hospital refused to cater to him because he didn't have any money on him. So they had to take him back to the gutter and watch him die. And this was reported in the press all over the world, and the authorities decided to do something about it, had to do something. Now, Mother Teresa had applied several times for a place where the people who are dying could die with dignity. She said they may have lived like animals, but I want them to die as angels. These were people who are incurably ill, chronically ill. And finally, because of the outcry over this young boy, they gave her this house. It's still there. And the idea would be that this would become a shrine, a temple where people could be brought in, taken care of, being washed, being nurtured, being fed, and allowed to die in comfort. And this is exactly what happened. The problem was it was attached to a Hindu temple called Kali. Now, I don't know if you know your Hindu religion, but Kali is pretty much of a very scary figure. You know, she's the goddess of death, the goddess of destruction. And as it happened, that's where people go who are about to die, or if you want to pray for someone who's on a deathbed, okay? And the rumor spread that what the sisters of Mother Teresa were doing were gathering up Hindu people and spiriting them to this place in order to forcefully baptize them into Catholicism. Okay? The rumor spread that unless you were baptized in Christianity, you would not be able to benefit from these services. And a mass protest was organized. So severely that the head of the health services of Calcutta, this is a guy called Ahmad, was ordered to appear and make an investigation. And on the day it happened, all the media were out there. Thousands of Hindus shouting were outside this house. And Dr. Ahmad said, I want to talk to Mother Teresa. And one of the sisters brought her to, and she said, I'm busy right now. She was using pincers, taking maggots off an open wound on a beggar. She says, I'm sorry, this is more important. And Dr. Ahmad saw that. He went outside and he told the crowd and the media that were gathered there, I will send this woman away. Loud cheers, right? He says, but I will only send her away if your mothers and your sisters replace her and do the work that she's doing here with these poor people. Because I've seen what she's doing. And she's doing incredible work. She is a saint. And it's so incredible that today, of course, she's being canonized and may very well become a saint, that it was up to a Muslim person to first recognize that she was a saint. Of course, our organization has thousands of adherents, 600 missions, schools, shelters, spread over 120 countries. What these people have in common, I found in writing this book, that they all received some form of inspiration. I call it whispers of God. You know, inspiration, the word comes from the Latin verb inspirare, which literally means to breathe into someone. To breathe into someone. So I call that whispers of God that move these people to do extraordinary things, regardless of whether they were Catholic or Protestant or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or whatever. Everyone receives a whisper from God, and that's what allows us to do great things. Plato once wrote that we all carry the spark of the divine in ourselves. It's like an iPhone. All you have to do is pick it up and listen to what's being said. Thank you so much. Thank you.